All right, let's do it.
Well, good morning, attendees, and welcome once again to our presentation with Casey Conway. We're going to continue this, and Casey, you correct me if I'm wrong, but on the 5th and on the 12th of May, so those are Tuesdays, so it'll be every other Tuesday, but commencing next Tuesday, the 5th of May, and we'll continue this as in every other week, and maybe on the weeks that we don't have Casey, we'll make a different presentation, so we'll have something for you every Tuesday, but that has not been decided yet. But thanks so much for being on board, everybody, and I'm going to turn this over to Casey Conway, who at this point needs no further introduction.
Thanks, Terry. So you did like me. I still had my April calendar up and said the May date. So I think Mary will confirm it with everybody and Lauren. The Tuesday the 5th, which will be next week, and then the 19th. We'll skip the 12th. So I've got a little bit of a conflict on the 12th. So 5th and the 19th, but Mary will get you all up to date. So with that, why don't we'll quickly blink at the disclaimer slide that everybody's got memorized by now, Terry, right? Number 2. So there it is, blink, and FLCCIM Institutes Absolve. All right, so we'll keep a little bit of our Abbott and Costello. So this is kind of the pitch here. So this week, we get more than a third of the public companies' earnings reported out. So it's the busiest week of the whole first quarter, any quarter season. And we know that most companies are ducking on providing forward guidance, but I will tell you, they're still giving you a lot of guidance. So look at what they're doing. So they're, rather than saying, here's what we expect in our financial numbers and ratios for second quarter and third quarter in our earnings, they're not doing that, but they're telling you what they're doing with CapEx. They're telling you what's happening with leasing and rent reductions and all that type stuff. So we'd be so lucky if they would just give us this kind of guidance going forward. It's pretty good. I'll go over a couple of ones we had last week. Prologis and Equifax that I want to go back over. Then we'll go over a bunch of them that hit this morning. So why don't we go on the next slide, Terry? All right. So before I jump in, I wrote a piece that posted, I think, last night or this morning on our ACRE website. And I figured it was Monday, and we needed a good news Monday for a change. So the piece is, while we're sheltered in place, who's still working? And the centerpiece is this graphic on the right from Visual Capitalist. They do some great work. If you haven't checked them out, man, great stuff there. So what this is these bubbles based on their size. Size of the bubble means the number of people employed. And then the bubbles represent the industry or the profession. And then if they're below, in the bottom half of that chart, below 100,000, you can see how much of our workforce is doing the really tough green or medical related, and blue or supply chain and retail related jobs, like the cashiers and the stocking folks and the butcher at Publix, or the truck drivers, or anybody in the supply chain. And what you'll notice is how much of our workforce, it stood out to me, how much of our workforce is really making low wage, between $25,000 and $75,000 a year, that are putting their lives on the line so we can be at home and do Zoom meetings and with our computers and safe and fully stocked, and things delivered to the house like groceries and Netflix working and everything else. So it's an amazing situation. After World War II, we did something for the workforce that took care of us, that were able to stay at home during the war. We had a GI Bill, and we took care of those people. And I'm hoping that maybe we could put forth what I call a PGP, a public gratitude payment program to this type workforce. And I think for the medical responders, we could do something like we could forgive their remaining student loan debt. And for those that weren't in college or that don't have student loan debt, maybe we can give some sort of a one-time payment of about $25,000 for what they did for us. It'd be very Greatest Generation like. It's an idea I'm trying to float out there. We can debate it, but this brought it to light this weekend. And guess what? It cost a fraction of the trillions and hundreds of billions that we're spending right now. It would be a really modest program to take care of these people. So encourage you to read that piece. One of the other ones that struck me in this piece as I was doing the research was there's another workforce element that's not on here. And we've all taken it for granted. And I see through it myself, right through news conferences and briefings. And I've actually been on webinars recently where they're with public agency groups or bank regulators, and it's this sign language, folks. So if you're a government entity and you're doing Zoom webinars right now, you have to also have a sign language person there. So these sign language folks, American Sign Language Institute, they've got these sign language folks that are out there in the public at all these briefings and meetings, and now on Zoom webinar things that are not only putting their lives at risk, but you know what? Guess what language didn't exist before coronavirus? Any of the language about coronavirus. So they've had to invent this extemporaneously, and believe it or not, the sign for, say, coronavirus or the PPP plan or any of these, the CARES Bill Act, it is different regionally in the country and across the globe. So if someone's signing in Texas and it's being picked up on the national news for New York media, the hearing impaired might have a confusion with the sign that they see. So that's a group I'd never thought about that's doing heroic jobs, and they are just ridiculously low paid. So that's a piece. Look at it. That's my focus on the workforce, and there's a lot that's working right now. So let's be grateful for that. Go to the next slide, Terry. So I want to pick up, I mentioned a few of these maybe on the webinar with Eddie over the last Friday, but in case some of you missed it, I wanted to pick up with Prologis and Pulte. So these are two home builders where neither are giving forward guidance, but boy, they tell us a lot. So let's start with Prologis. If you're in the industrial space, like you're in Lakeland or Winter Haven in the Inland Empire of Florida, here's a good one for you to look back on. If you're an appraiser or you're a broker that's dealing with, buyer or seller fussing over pricing, just give them the Prologis earnings. So Prologis is telling us that they're doing pretty well. They see a few clear themes. They see that e-commerce obviously is driving more demand in their industry, and that there's a bifurcation between customers that are faring well and not so well. Their smaller tenants and more multi-tenant buildings are having a more difficult time. But looking forward, they found that their lease proposal generations, just new leases in the last 4 weeks, are up 21%. Retention is over 80%. And those metrics compare very favorably with where they've normally been preceding the coronavirus. They've collected, by the first week of April, they'd collected over 85% of their April rent. And that's within 1% of their normal pace within the first week to 10 days of April. Rent relief requests, guess what? They're denying 70% of them because they have a bunch of customers that are able to pay rent and they're just gaming and taking advantage of the situation. The 30% they are granting, those are to their smaller customers that are in multi-tenant buildings that truly are supporting, say, an in-town restaurant chain or a small business type customer. So that's very greatest generation of them, but not everybody's getting an automatic rent request. And big sophisticated entities like Prologis are really distinguishing it. They notice a new term. So here's your new term I gave you before last week, demand shock with the real-time indicators that will have a lot of order cancellations by businesses that went away or don't see the consumer demand. Well, safety stock is another one that's going to add to industrial demand. And that is, we're going to throw away just-in-time inventory created by the Japanese and given to us in the 1980s when I was in business school. And we're going to replace it with safety stock. And we're probably going to have it in more redundant places. So that's the bullet point with the blue shading as you go down, third from the bottom. And then the other thing is they see that they've got 300 million in development projects that are all proceeding. And guess what? 85% of them are already pre-leased. So all this fear about all this construction and it's all spec and it's not going to be taken care of, 85% of it's already pre-leased and the tenants are reaffirming those, unlike us airline passengers that are canceling our reservations. Leases are not being canceled on the pre-lease for new construction. So aren't you glad Prologis isn't giving any guidance anymore? I sure got a lot out of that, Terry. How about you?
Yeah, I am glad.
So this is why I encourage you to read these things because You know, it's like I'm a third generation appraiser in MAI. I can say this. Appraisers may not always know what to tell you in the narrative of the appraisal, but they do confession in the addendum and they put it all in there. In every picture and everything and every document they never talked about that are important to the value, they stick in the addendum. But same thing in some of the guidance. It's not in the forward guidance, but it's in what their behavior is. Let's go over to the right side and look at Pulte, because we got DR Horton today as well. So Pulte, just like DR Horton today, they really had a great quarter. Earnings were up 26%. Closings were up 16%. Their backlog of orders was up 20% to over 12,000 homes, and most of them not being canceled. But you know what Pulte told us last week? They're panicked. So they decided to go archive their playbook that they built after the 2009-2010 housing crisis. And they said, we're going to pull it back and we're going to do the 4 key steps. Number one, we're done with land acquisition. They pulled back over $100 million in land acquisition. They also noted that they're going to aggressively manage cash flow. That means labor cuts. It means dragging out payments and creating more receivables to subcontractors. All kinds of the non-good things rippling down through the housing industry. They're going to draw down their bank lines of credit. They remember the banks from before. They don't believe the large banks are going to behave well. So they took and they drew down their $700 million line of credit from Bank of America, and $700 million of their $1.9 billion in cash is just there because they pulled down their line of credit. So I guess when interest rates are almost zero, you can afford to do that. But that's what we did because we learned that behavior mechanism from 2009 and 10 when the banks pulled all lines of credit. And the last thing is Pulte noted that a lot contracts are under option agreements. 45% of their 160,000 lots are under control via option, and they're not taking them down. They're going to drag them out. So if you're a banker, or if you're a land developer, or you're somebody that's got lot development that's going to one of these public builders, you better really be reading the fine print of those contracts. And this is where CCIMs can really be of value to customers in our real estate community right now. Those that are land developers that you have clients with or that are in land development, really make sure they're reading and understanding what's being said in these earnings. And kind of do the what if thinking from Pulte revelations. So now we'll go forward and we'll look at what DR Horton told us in their behavior. So we'll go to the next slide. There we go. So this is what I got up at 5:30 this morning. So I was ready for all of these hitting at 6:30 this morning. These were the early ones. So I'm going to go over the good. So Pepsi, you all should have known that Pepsi was going to produce really good numbers. We're all eating at home. We're snacking a lot more. We've got all those products. We're on our track to becoming quicker type 2 diabetics. And Pepsi said they confirmed that. And so they said their revenue growth was up over 7%. And guess what they did? They affirmed their dividend and stock buybacks. They're not afraid of the year. They see things going really, really well. And when you look at all the meat plants that are having now to close, and we're probably going to have a hard time getting meat products, we're probably going to go to the snack aisle and pick up more snack products. So before I go on, I want to show you the earnings that so far this morning. I found a theme in them. The number 7. So if you want to buy lottery tickets today, make sure you have at least 1 7 in them, because 7 is the magic number today. So Pepsi, revenue growth over 7%. Next one, Pfizer. They beat top and bottom line earnings per share numbers. And guess what they didn't do? They didn't back away not only from next quarter's guidance, they affirmed their entire remainder of the year guidance. So Pfizer really sees things clicking quite well with them. And then compare them or contrast them to Merck. They beat, but they backed away from their guidance. So I really applaud Pfizer to saying, look, we have some backbone, we have some courage here, we know what's going on, we know what our patents and our product line is, and we're pretty comfortable to confirm that and give guidance. Where Merck, they kind of got a little afraid of themselves. So we'll go over to the right side, the less good. So Southwest, it wasn't as bad as expected. And I tell you, if you listen to one CEO interview on all of CNBC or Bloomberg today, catch the one with the Southwest CEO, Gary Mallard. Great job. The guy was sharp as a tack, knows what's going on, has a game plan, and they've been preparing for something like this for quite some time. So even though their plane load capacity right now is below 7%, that means 94% of the seats are empty. Um, they're doing a lot of things right. They're sitting on a boatload of cash. They got over $9 billion of cash. They own outright over half of their airplanes. So even if we only come back 50% and they have to give the other half that are leveraged back to the banks, I don't think the banks know what to do with an airplane. Maybe Terry, they can call you and help figure out how to fly it back to the back to the bank. But they're really on top of their game plan. They're really ready to come back. And I'm most confident that what's coming out of what Southwest is telling us and their CEO is they're going to be less inclined to cancel route structure. So you want to pay attention to your airlines at your airports, especially in your secondary cities. In Florida, you've had pretty good service from Southwest. This is good news because Southwest is saying with the amount of cash that we've got and the bailout program that's coming that we have until September to decide whether we're going to let the government own 10% of our airline in stock grants, we think we can make it. And we think we can make it without canceling routes. So that's very encouraging if you're a city serviced by Southwest Airlines. So for your local economic and development folks, this is really good news. I had to speak earlier this week, I think it was this week or last week, to the St. Louis CCIM chapter in Realtors. And one of the things I told them is you guys really need to be anxious about route structure cuts because they're not an airport that had a lot of them. It's not a lot of profitability. And I think it's one where they could lose a lot of route structure to them. So that's a good news for Southwest. The other thing is they said is they're canceling more Boeing 737 MAX orders. They're not confident that things are going to get up and running and they don't need them. So they're going to keep flying with what they've got. Not good news for Boeing. Even worse news for Airbus in Mobile, Alabama. Caterpillar. They missed on the top and bottom, but here's some great news too about Caterpillar. They mentioned that 75% of their manufacturing in the United States is already back open and operating. And the orders that they had from China for earth moving and mining and all that type of stuff, they're all just fine. They're not canceling them. They also have $7 billion cash on hand. So they're in a position to make it into the third quarter. And so I'm really encouraged because Caterpillar is one of those industrial machinery infrastructure elements, not just for the United States, but the whole bleeping world. The world loses Caterpillar, we're back to using a hoe and maybe a donkey to get our gardening and everything else going at the job site. So really encouraging news from Caterpillar. And then 3M. There's a lot of dimensions to 3M. They beat their top and bottom, but they're like Pulte. They're afraid of the dark and monsters incorporated that might be in their closet. So they're massively cutting CapEx. What you got to remember about 3M, it's a bigger business than just making M95 masks. And a lot of their other business lines aren't doing quite as good as the M95 mask. So there's your good, there's your less good. And I think for Florida, Southwest Airlines is what I would say is one of the biggest pieces of good news to come out of the earnings so far this week. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so what do we have on our radar and coming up? So D.R. Horton, the earnings weren't out when I was putting these slides together. They did come out this morning, and they kind of shamed Pulte, and they said, well, we're not so worried about putting the 2009 housing crisis playbook in order. And so their numbers were up quite a bit. They had a 40% increase in earnings in the first quarter. 40%. That's when we're not supposed to be selling homes anyway, let alone the coronavirus. The revenue was up over 90%. Their closings were up 8%, and that carried through into March. And in the first quarter, they sold over 14,500 homes. And so they essentially said, we're going to keep charging, but where we're going to focus, we're going to keep an eye on cash flow. We're going to tighten things up. What we're observing are three things in the market. The first thing is the product that is selling is affordability, and it's affordability in the suburbs. And what they said is their agents are telling them the most traffic that's coming through their communities is ones that have affordable product and are in the suburbs. And guess what they were or currently are? They're multifamily tenants in the city. So this thing where we're trying to figure out what's going to happen with our urban multifamily and will they stay in the city, what they're telling the public home builders like D.R. Horton right now is we want to get into a house. We want to get out of high density areas and we want to move to the suburbs. And we think buying an affordable entry home, if we can get into it now at 3% or range mortgage rates, we're going. So that's incredibly enlightening that came out of them. Now, Terry and I were joking a little bit before. They had another revelation. It's kind of one of those, I really didn't need an analyst to tell me this, but they said, we're finding that vacant new homes, people are willing to go tour and visit versus existing coronavirus contaminated homes. So we now have a rarity, which is we have more new homes vacant and available for sale than we do existing homes. That is a rarity. That's an anomaly that we don't normally see. So Florida, you're a big home building state. You're a very affordable state. You don't have an income tax. You got 0 interest rates. You got a diverse economy that's not all just cruise ship and tourism industry or Disney. And so I think this is encouraging news from D.R. Horton that came out since I put this stuff out this morning. Ford Motor Company comes at the close of the day. Like GM did a dastardly deed this week. They suspended their dividend. This really hurts retirees and their union retirees that depend on that stock, that have been loyal to the company. And this is why paying attention to the dividend stuff is so important. I think as we emerge out of here, we're going to find that companies that were able to sustain their dividend and their word are going to come out of this much better, and that stock price is going to rise and be more resilient than those that just immediately cut to it. And I get the stock buybacks, cutting that and saving that cash. But I think you have a covenant with your dividend, and especially when you look at a lot of these good, long history paying dividend companies, that's where our retirees get a lot of their income. And I think there's a covenant there. And these companies like the motor companies like GM, and if Ford follows suits, are really going to pay a price. Ford didn't take a bailout during the financial crisis, but GM did, and really disappointed to see him immediately cut dividends like that, especially when the president's enacted the Defense Act, and we're using many of these auto manufacturers to do other things in other manufacturing. So we're supporting them pretty well. I'm disappointed in the immediate dividend cut or the full cut. Friday, this is Energy Friday, man. We get all of the energy companies. We get Chevron and Exxon and Phillips 66. We get all of them. And as you know, what's been going on with the energy sector, this is pretty ugly. So we'll want to see what they're doing in both CapEx, and we'll want to also see what they're doing, in terms of drilling and storage, because storage is the big problem. So you guys in Florida are pretty smart. So you sent all the oil storage tankers to California. So if they bump into each other and break open, it's going to ruin the California beaches, and the Florida is going to be just fine. You guys really were prudent in that. I don't know how you pulled that off, but there's more oil. I think it's 150 million barrels of oil in oil container vessels anchored off the coast of California right now. It's unbelievable. It's like 5 days of all of the world's oil demand when we were up and running full speed. So we'll find out if the Easter Bunny went and hid the Energizer energy bunny at all. I think this one, there's going to be some surprises here. I really worry. My big concern here on the energy is one of the things that made our country so strong the past few years, and that made things like, I think, trade deals and the tariffs battle that Trump was having with others in Asia and around the world, was we became energy independent. And if we lose energy independence, and so many of our energy companies in this process, we really have done a big dent to our national defense. So anyway, that's my little thoughts there. So here's your big homework for the weekend. Berkshire Hathaway holds its annual stockholders meeting this weekend, and Warren Buffett will be releasing his letter probably Thursday or Friday, and that's always very enlightening. And so they own so many companies, from say a Dairy Queen to manufactured home communities to bank stocks like Bank of America and Wells Fargo. They probably have the best view, really deep into so many of the watershed companies in our economy. So anyway, so we got Caterpillar and Horton today. I talked about that. Southwest Airlines was really good. Starbucks and UPS report. These companies don't always give a specific time. They either do pre-opening sometime during the day or after close. So I think Starbucks and UPS are later in the day or at the close of today. UPS will be interesting to see how their shipping business is holding up in their margins compared to, say, FedEx, which is really doing a great job for us here in America. Starbucks is going to be enlightenment to our discretionary spending. So I suspect that Keurig is going to do a lot better than Starbucks because we're all at home making our own coffee and making our own noise to make our lattes. Wednesday, eBay, Facebook, and then you guys will get a couple here that are worth looking at. Tomorrow, Royal Caribbean will give us another view into the cruise ship industry. How many of you have been paying attention to look at what's happened to Carnival Cruises? Carnival, a big stake was just acquired or sold to Saudi Arabia, their sovereign wealth fund. So I'm kind of curious, what is Saudi Arabia seeing in the cruise ship business at this stage that maybe we're missing, or what are they planning on doing with those ships? So we'll see if Royal Caribbean can shed any light. And Norfolk Southern, our two big airports on the East Coast and Mid-Atlantic are CSX coming out of Jacksonville, and then Norfolk Southern coming into Atlanta and serving the Mid-Atlantic. So these are two very important bellwethers. Kansas City Southern really had good numbers preceding this. I think Norfolk Southern may be one of the more challenged here. CSX is such a watershed from Florida up into the center of the country. They move a lot more. Your predecessor CEO who passed away, I think last year, a year ago, had really done a major reformation job on CSX, similar to what he did on the Canadian railroads. So let's see what Norfolk Southern tells us. Thursday, I call it AAA Day, so we get Amazon, Apple, and American Airlines. So I have a theory that American Airlines is going to be about as opposite a story as Southwest as you can have, and this spells very bad news if you're some of the Midwest markets and Midwest secondary markets where American is very big and services them, also into the New York airports. But then, Terry, here we go. We're going to check our blood sugars at the end of the day. We're going to get the big calories companies. We're going to get Dunkin' Donuts and McDonald's and Kraft and Kellogg's and Monster Beverage, and see if what we're buying is doing very well. And after all that, we're going to find out if we're going to go back to the gym or just order more gym equipment at home. So Planet Fitness and then self-storage. I'm not optimistic about the numbers on Planet Fitness. When my wife is doing Zumba, I think some things are in serious trouble. And self-storage, what we're finding at home and my neighbors, we're not going to continue to have anything in storage. We're going through and cleaning everything out. And as soon as Goodwill opens up and receives donations again, we're going to take everything that was in storage or headed for storage, and we're going to donate it. So I think the public storage is probably going to take a hit out of this. And then you saw the numbers on Friday. The interesting one to close out the day on Friday, so don't uncork your bottle of wine too quickly. We get Clorox at the end of the day. And so I think they're going to disinfect every bit of bad news that we had in earnings this week. And I think the numbers are going to be pretty stellar there. So that's a quick take. We did it in 30 minutes. I will share a distinction I got alerted to yesterday from the Alabama Center for Real Estate and the University of Alabama. They don't like Red-Shoe Economist. So they don't want any more branding. It's all got to be Roll Tide Economist or University of Alabama. So the Red-Shoe Economist I will be exclusively referencing for the CCIM Institute. These will be the CCIM Red-Shoe Economist takes or whatnot. When I put Red-Shoe in any kind of post on social media, I get about 10 times the hits as a regular one. So disappointed. The university didn't see the value Red-Shoe, but I think CCIM does, and we'll keep that brand alive for the CCIM Institute. With that, let's take some questions. Well, let's see. I got one more slide. Sorry about that. That's what happens when you get up at 5:30 in the morning when you're in sheltering at home. So take all these earnings and crunch this down to this graphic that I shared on the virtual webinar with Eddie Blanton last Friday, or during the mid-year governance meetings. So think about these earnings and think about what they're affecting in your commercial real estate or your market, what an industry might do to cap rates, or what a particular company that's germane to your economy might do to rents and NOI. These earnings directly factor into this chart, this graphic. And so in 2009, we went to the bottom right corner and we lost 40% of commercial real estate values through a combination of cap rates and NOI decline. It was more influenced by a 200 basis point movement in cap rates than it was a change in NOI. So I'm still in the camp. I think we see something in the range of 15 to 25% impact on commercial real estate by property type and by market. I see it being worst in manufacturing markets that have auto and aircraft manufacturing, like Boeing in Charleston, South Carolina, Airbus in Mobile, Alabama, which is not a U.S. company. It's competition to Boeing. It's not going to get any federal dollar support outside of Alabama, regardless of what Senator Shelby tries to do. And in Europe, France is already telling us they're only reopening those Airbus manufacturing plants in Europe and in France to support their economy and their workforce. So I think auto manufacturing is going to be slow to come back. Aircraft manufacturing is going to be a multi-year recovery. The cruise ship industry, I don't think we know the outcome yet. I'm very curious to figure out what the Saudis are doing with their big purchase stake in Carnival Cruises. Anybody that has any good insights, you get a box of donuts from Terry and me and a Monster Energy drink, right? If you can figure it out. But take these earnings and things I've shared with you, like on Southwest. Southwest is great news for you in Florida, a major served market with secondary markets. Southwest is going to survive and they're going to keep flying to Florida. I'm not so sure that American and other airlines like United are going to continue to be able to serve some of the Midwest markets. So I want to just put this back in front of you to keep that in mind. We'll see what happens a year from now. I'm saying we see between 15 and 25% decline. I think it's worst in the urban areas. It's worse for urban office. It's worse for urban multifamily, and it's worse for urban retail. And I think as we lift back out of this thing, we're going to end up with, to really get this thing going, we're going to find that just like after World War II, we moved to the suburbs from the cities. We're going to reverse the trend that we were in. It's one part affordability, and it's one part I don't want to have a commute. I like being close or at home, and I don't want to be in high dense areas. The psychological scarring from this thing is gonna last a while longer. So I think those are a few of the things we'll see. I think it's less in industrial, but they're not going to go unscathed. The multi-tenant, smaller tenant bay usage is going to take a bigger hit, and Prologis is already telling us that, but they're trying to help them. And I think retail is going to be really challenged. We just all need to put our adaptive reuse hats back on and go from there. So I think that was the last one. Terry, we'll go to the last slide and see. Sponsors, maybe? Yep. So we'll open up to questions. My last point with going through these earnings is if Winston Churchill were alive today, he might redo or take back that 1940 quote that I shared with you in a prior session, that human beings were not given the ability to foresee or predict the large extent any unfolding events because we just couldn't handle it. Life would be intolerable. If he'd known what public companies would do in earnings, even though they don't issue forward guidance, I think he'd feel good about forecasting more future events. So if you pay attention to these things, even without forward guidance, there's a lot of nuggets in there. So I'll try to answer any questions and we'll open it up.
I'll go ahead and begin the question and answer session for you, Casey, since we don't have a lot up on the board here. With a question that, 7 states have announced that they're going to attempt to gradually reopen, including Georgia, Michigan, Alaska, Hawaii. What industries do you think will rebound most quickly?
Yeah, great question. So, I think there were some Georgia CCIMs advising the governor of Georgia when in the last session I pointed out, or maybe it was the first one, that the first thing Florida's legislature did was pass a resolution naming Florida State as the NCAA basketball champion. And they were upset about that. So they think that opening up is an SEC sport and they want to be first. And so they've just opened the whole damn place up. It's pretty crazy here in Georgia. They've opened up tattoo parlors, massage parlors, bowling alleys. The whole darn place is opened up. And I'm a little concerned about it because what they're already finding is a lot of businesses aren't comfortable. In fact, a lot of businesses, insurance carriers, are telling you to be careful about the risk. So one of the things you're going to find, so Georgia, we've opened up some of our barbershops and hair salons. They're requiring you to sign an affidavit going in before your hair appointment that you've not had the virus, you've not traveled outside of your area, that you've been quarantined for at least 2 weeks, or they won't cut your hair. So this is what I think is going to lead to these immunity passports. A year from now, just like after 9/11, we're going to have a TSA pre-check system. It's going to be called Immunity Passports. And to go through TSA and to get on a plane or go through the CLEAR system, you are going to have your medical records and some sort of immunization that's going to upload to your phone, and it's going to confirm you're virus-free and you're safe to travel, to go to a concert event, to go to an SEC football game, you name it. And you think I'm joking? Go look what they're doing in Europe. Spain, Germany, France, they're already using it. They're doing versions of immunity passports. Our big hole is we don't have the testing in place. We don't have enough tests just to test regular people right now, yet alone everybody that wants to get on a plane. So we got a lot of work to go there. I think it's going to be slower. I think the things that you're going to see open up first, believe it or not, are kind of entertainment or outdoor experiential. Terry, you mentioned the golf courses, the beaches. And I think if people behave well, we'll see more of that proceed. So anything outdoors, I'm worried about swimming pools, especially in subdivisions that have homeowners associations. And if they can't get their permits to open the pool or they don't have swim teams, that's a big part of their annual revenue. We could see some repercussions there. Next up, Terry, you and I may not need a haircut, but I think a lot of people do. I think Lauren or Mary had a picture of a guy when we were doing our practice session that he definitely needed a haircut. So I think the haircuts, and we're going to do this fine. Instead of having 5 people or 10 people waiting in the barber shop, mine has already done it and said, look, I'll send you 30 minutes out or up to an hour where I think you can fit in, and I'll give you a 1-hour window. And if you come within that window, if there's more than 3 people in the barbershop, then you need to wait in your car or go get something at Chick-fil-A through drive-through. The restaurants, we're seeing the restaurants open. They desperately need to get back to work, but we're going to see it. They're removing half the chairs. They're removing half the tables. So you're going to see much more distancing. It's going to feel like a Kramer, a Seinfeld episode. You remember the episode when Kramer decided he was going to adopt a section of the New Jersey Turnpike, and he decided he wanted wide lanes. So he made really wide lanes for his part, but he forgot that eventually it would come back in and all these crashes result. I think we're going to find that one area for CCIMs that really market themselves right now, property owners, property investors, and bankers are understanding, increasing appraisers, that there's a new dynamic in what you can afford to pay in rent. When I started my career, we had a ratio for retail that was retailers could generally pay between 15 and 18% of gross revenues in total occupancy costs, rent, common area, all the net pieces. That ratio went way down. We saw it go down to 10% or less over the last decade. I think that ratio is going to have to be revisited. And so if you're still going to generate the same or less revenue with maybe needing double the square footage, or a third less revenue with the same square footage because you got to space out more, you can't pay the same rent. And that same rent means your NOI is going to be hit, which means the value of your property. So I think we're going to face a major repricing of retail and office because we're not going to want it used in as dense a fashion. And CCIMs with all their investment management and marketing training are the best trained to do that. And so I think that's a real opportunity. So anything outdoors, recreational, I think people want to get out and dine. I think they want to get their hair cut. The Home Depots and the grocery stores have stayed open. I think they'll be limited for office space. So already IRM is working very closely with what they consider essential tenants, and essential tenants will be allowed to open up, but they're going to have occupancy monitoring. So tenants are going to have to do a new thing probably where they've got to report any of their employees that come and go in that building that have, say, been to Las Vegas as a hotspot or been to Asia, and you won't be allowed to physically come into the building under penalty of an affidavit and other penalties. So I think office to the degree of essential tenants, more warehousing. We're going to have to do a lot of work in warehousing with fogging and sanitizing on that side. Does that help?
Very, very helpful. We have an excellent question from Hazel, but I was sharing with Casey earlier that I woke up this morning to a nightmare that I had a man bun because I hadn't seen my hairstylist for over 2 months. And so I was just sharing that but Hazel has a very, very good question for you, Casey. Are you still seeing a W-shaped recession curve, which you mentioned last week? And in regards to NOI and cap rate curve, how do you see cap rate going when tenants have not paid in the last weeks, and the values are dropping.
Yeah, Hazel gets the award for the what if thinking today. You get the what if thinking award, Hazel. So the first thing I'll say, Terry, is I'll pay big money to get a picture of you wearing a man bun. I think the next conference we get together in Florida, you and I will wear man buns, and then we'll ease into being in person with slippers. We'll still wear our slippers and we'll put our man bun on. That's how
Red slippers, a man bun, and an earring.
Yeah, there you go. So, Hazel, the two-part question. I absolutely still see us in a W recession. I'm growing increasingly fearful that we could see it be a U, which is what we don't want to do. We want to do a U-turn and get away from that sucker. That's what we saw in the 70s. You go down and you stay on the bottom longer. I'm still confident in a W because we've got states that are aggressively trying to open up to get the economy going. And if you think it's that the states are doing this, magnanimously and, trying to help the psychology of Americans, they're motivated honestly by one thing. Their unemployment insurance funds and their trusts are being depleted. They're just about like what they were in 2010 when they had to borrow from the federal government. And it took years for most of them to pay their loans back for unemployment trust funds. So they're about depleted. They want people back at work. They don't want any more unemployment being drawn out of their state trusts. So as we lift the states, I think there's going to be more aggressive because of motivations like that. Sorry, politicians. I know what you're up to. We'd like to maybe be a little more reserved and go a little bit slower and not do like Georgia and open everything up, including bowling alleys and tattoo parlors. I don't get that at all. So I think if we do that and we don't see a big relapse, we'll see good lift into July and August. But what we're going to discover as we get second quarter earnings, 90 days from now. So we'll be getting these in August and right during the political conventions. I think those numbers are going to be very ugly. We're going to see the holes in the economy we didn't plug. We're going to see, for example, what happens when 1 in 4 small businesses are gone and not occupying retail space. What happens when the numbers very conservatively now are 40% of all restaurants are basically gone. 40%. And the Southwest CEO, Gary, that was talking this morning, he pointed something out very important. They asked him, so when do airlines get back flying? And he had basically 2 or 3 points. He said, number one, they're only going to fly to places that have something to offer you to do. So if you have no hotels open, if you don't have restaurants, if there's not a destination reason, you're not even going to be on the radar. So Terry, your point, if you've got golf courses, if Disney opens up, if you've got beaches, these are compelling reasons that people will go, they'll fly, they'll travel. Remember, the airlines probably had some of the safest air in the country. They had all HEPA filters. They just weren't always cleaning the planes as good. I think you're going to see incredible cleaning in between, and the turn times spread out a little bit on planes. So I think what happens is in August, September, we're going to see the second quarter earnings. We're going to see the holes we didn't plug. We're going to see manufacturing. We're going to see that the airlines aren't flying 2 million passengers a day anymore. They're still only doing 1 million, maybe 1.5 million if we get lucky. So there's a lot more damage there. The hotel industry is much more destroyed. The cruise industry is much more dented and banged up. And I think as we realize all those, and there's not a compelling reason in the battle in Congress to keep spending trillions. Remember, we've added $5 trillion to our $23 trillion in debt going into this year in just 6 weeks. And Congress is on track, $500 billion here, $500 billion there. It really is something we need to pay attention to. So I think the propensity and willingness to just spend trillions and trillions into June and July and August is going to wane. And so more entities are going to have to stand on their own 2 feet. And hopefully we have more open and we don't have a relapse. My big fear, we see a relapse of any kind that really starts to spread. New York, Las Vegas, here in Georgia, we're toast. We're in a U recession. The psychology will be so damaged. And so that's why, as much as I want to see the economy open and going again, I'm kind of in that camp. Let's be cautious for another couple of weeks. Let's really focus on getting the testing that we need. Let's figure out how to do these immunity passports so that population that is moving around, we feel comfortable that they're moving around. 2 weeks here is going to be a whole lot better than going through what we just went through for 2 months. So I'm worried about that. And the other part of her question was beyond the was the cap rates. So I really don't see the cap rate movements it's a good question with tenants not having paying rent. So it's just, they're renegotiating that up front. Sorry about that. Speaker didn't mute his phone. Um, so that's front end loaded. And you look at like Prologis, what they're saying. Yeah, we're still collecting 88% of our rent. Retail is going to be a lot worse. On that cap rate thing, I don't think the cap rates are going to change because it's more tied to the cost of capital. And debt and equity capital is not more expensive right now. The leverage side is incredible. The banks are continuing to see that credit flows from the Federal Reserve. I think it's an NOI destruction. So I think focus more on the NOI loss. And your question is a good one. If you're not paying rent, the appraiser will probably still use close to the same cap rate because they don't have any evidence otherwise. There's not a lot of transactions. So remember, the appraisers have to support their market conditions adjustments, and that includes a cap rate. And if there's not many transactions, they're going to do a band of investment. They're going to use mortgage equity technique to develop that. And those are saying you can stay, a 5 or 6 cap rate is still very attractive. So it's going to be the NOI. They're just going to schedule in less NOI. They're going to put more time at vacancy up front, longer leasing time, maybe more concessions, and that's all on the NOI side. So I think unlike 2009, which started as a big cap rate adjustment and hit that ruined values, this one is not going to be the cap rate hit. The Fed also, we got a Fed meeting here that concludes tomorrow, and the Fed's going to tell us we're going to be very accommodative, not for weeks or months, but probably years. The Fed's going to keep us in this zero interest rate environment, I think, for 24, 36 months. Look at what would happen in 2018 when they tried to raise interest rates 4 times and the tantrum that the market had in December 2018. They're not going to rush it, not going to rush it at all. Does that help you, Hazel? You get the award for best what-if thinking.
She said, thank you for enlightening her. So she did appreciate that answer. And I was intrigued by your comment on student loan debt for first responders, Casey, and the idea that maybe some of that debt would be forgiven. Is that actually talk at the government level by Congress, or has that been bandied around? I know it has in the debates. They've bandied that a little bit, but.
Yeah, not of any serious consequence. And I think it's going to take some leadership to do that. That's why we're a prominent organization. We're a prominent industry. NAR is one of the most prominent lobbyist groups in the country. I really feel, whether it's our first responders in medical, we owe them some tangible form of gratitude. They've, think of what they've done and potentially bringing the virus home. All the things that they've endured, we owe something, just like we did the GIs that came home that disrupted their lives. My father was part of the ones where he left college and joined the Army Air Corps and was a pilot in the predecessor to the Air Force. And all of those guys came back and they got to pick up with their education and their lives in a very tangible way. And Americans had no problem with that. I think we have a problem with abuse and PPP, and the numbers are not staggering. With the PPP, we're talking hundreds of billions of dollars. We might only be talking in the tens of billions of dollars to do what we should do. It's the right thing to do. Just quit funding, the chaos of World Health Organization until they get their act together, or, any of these other, type programs that really aren't delivering on their results and their accountability. And let's do a one-time payment, take care of these people. So if y'all like the idea, let's start something. Let's start I call it a PGP, a public gratitude payment to those that really stepped up for us. Just think of, we couldn't do Zoom meetings. We couldn't work from home. We couldn't do any of this if we didn't have our grocery stores restocked and, Home Depot putting toilet paper secretly in their stores so when it runs out the grocery store, we can find it. Sign language people, all the transportation industry, truckers, these people put their lives on the line for us. And I think we owe them something. So I don't know what the right numbers are. My recommendation is 25 grand for anybody that didn't have student loan debt or was in the supply chain, retail, transportation side. And on any of the first responders or medical, I really think we can forgive their student loan debt. Program's already bankrupt, so what the heck?
That's music to my ears because I have a daughter that's a PA. But I've got 2 questions that I'm going to combine. One comes in from Bertie and the other one from Rick Harris. So Bertie's question, is will single tenant and multi-tenant retail REIT stock prices rebound to the pre-COVID levels? And then Rick Harris's question has to do with office buildings. Where do you see office buildings going in the 25 to 50,000 square foot range? And he's asking specifically about the Tampa Bay area, but maybe you have a more generalized answer to that question. So
Yeah.
the first question is about retail
REITs.
REITs. The second question is about suburban office buildings.
So on the REITs, it's really important to distinguish by the property type. Like you said, I'm on a board for an industrial REIT. We're one of the landlords for FedEx, and we're doing very well. We're not having problems collecting our rent. We have credit tenants. They never missed a dividend payment during the financial crisis. I will be shocked if they don't continue that dividend. So the industrial REITs I feel really good about. The retail REITs are going to be really tough. They already were in trouble. Look at some of them like a CBL in the mall REITs. Everything I wrote in the retail evolution paper that we did for CCIM back in October, take every one of those forecasts and move them forward 3 years. So everything we said in 2025 in terms of mall closing, store consolidation, more adaptive reuse, all of that type stuff, just move it forward 3 years. I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation, and I think we're going to see liquidation of assets, basically for repurpose, redevelopment. I'm not real optimistic. You look at the REITs out there, who's safe on the retail side. So I think it's going to be very, very challenging. I'm not someone that's going to go long or be a bull on the retail REITs. I think there's a lot of holes that we haven't plugged yet. So hate to be the bad news. I know Beth Hazler is probably ready to shoot me if she's on the call or whatnot, but keep trying. But I wouldn't be putting my money there. When you go over some of these other earnings, I'd put it into a Pepsi or an industrial REIT where I think they're going to pay out those dividends. As far as the office buildings and the smaller blocks in particular, I think again the model's going to go from urban to suburban. So the first thing is, with us all working at home, we kind of found maybe we'd like to have an office, but we don't want a long commute. And I think that's going to, be a residual effect that employees are going to share with their employers. That if there's any ability to put me in a suburban office 2 or 3 days a week and not have me come into the city, I love you, man. I'll even take a pay cut. So I see very strong demand in the suburbs, and I think the smaller space under 20,000 square feet is going to be even stronger, because companies are going to say, I can't go do a new 50 or 100,000 square foot deal when I'm still paying rent down in the city. So maybe 1 or 2 days a week, you got to go into the urban area and do a commute. The other 3 days, you know what? I can do a 10 or 15,000 square footer, and we rotate you guys on an every other day basis on a reservation. The accounting firms have already been doing this for decades, really. Deloitte was doing it when I was with them in the early 1990s. So I'm very bullish on suburban office space, and I'm very bullish on even the smaller chunks, because companies are still going to have to be wrestling with longer term leases in the big urban buildings, and they can't just totally do a redundant on that. They'll go smaller on that side. So I like suburban, I like smaller, and in Tampa in particular, I love the Tampa market. You got one of the best airports. You can fly in and be at a meeting in 10 minutes. You got lots of good breezes, so it blows anything bad away. And we all know that nice salt air kills a virus, right? That's a rumor we're starting. And 3, your office building set, except for a small population in the downtown area, many of your biggest inventory of office buildings is suburban based. You look at the North Shore area there near the airport and the mall, going out towards the Veterans Expressway. Really good product there. That's 3-story type stuff. It's easily dividable up into smaller bays. I'm very bullish on the Tampa market. It's one of the most undersold stories. So I'll give you an example. When Amazon was doing their HQ2 search, my number 1 market that I knew Amazon wouldn't put on their top list, but they should, was Tampa, Florida. I had Tampa and Orlando. That Orlando with the airport, the Desiree Ranch that goes out from the airport all the way to the Space Coast would have been an incredible buy. I think Gary Ralston was trying to work with Dean Saunders on that deal. They still sold it. And then I said Tampa. You got airport, you got connectivity, you got quality of life, you got affordability, you got all the pieces going for you. I think Tampa just needs to better market itself.
Thank you, Casey. I think we have room for one more question, but I made an observation. I was at the airport, the local airport. We're a very tiny demographic here, a city of 24,000, a county of 140 on the east coast of Florida. But the airport industrial businesses and primarily smaller businesses, 20 to 50,000 square feet, had full parking lots. So their employees were there. They seemed to be up and running. Some of those companies are boat companies, and that would seem almost counter to a downturn in the economy. I know after the 2008 collapse, boats were a bargain. You could buy all kinds of different boats. I live in a bulkheaded lot here in Vero Beach, and everybody is out in their boats almost every day. People that use their boats once or twice a year are going out several times a week, and I'm talking boats, kayaks, canoes. So that's a little counter. I think the fundamentals are different than 2008. So I find that interesting. Back to your red shoe, being at CCIM, I love the red shoes, but not being an Alabama family, we're Gators here in Florida. maybe some orange shoes or blue shoes would be in order. But I have a final question for you that I think is a great question, and it's from Connie. And she wants to know about international business for the CCIMs that do international. And I'm one of those, so I really would love to hear your answer on that.
So in terms of business reestablishing over there or them doing business here?
I think for me, and I'm not sure about Connie, for me, it would be our international clients that are buying here. And I know I have a deal right now, and it's an industrial deal that we've extended a little bit for an international client who's building a warehouse manufacturing operation here locally. So for us, it's mostly the internationals coming here to build, develop, acquire. And I'm talking in the business sector, not residential.
Okay. No, great question. So think about it. If coming out of this, we wanted to be investing in China, I don't know the markets. I don't know what provinces are good ones to recover. I don't know where the logistics infrastructure is. All the key basic questions after what they've gone through. They've got the same questions, whether it's Europe or Asia or Latin America coming here. And they know that manufacturing is going to be onshoring here more rapidly. We're not going to have everything manufactured abroad. We may not bring all the pharmaceutical or all the PP&E type stuff back here, but we're going to bring a lot of it. And they're going to want to understand, where would that go? So guess what's the number one question? Where's the logistics infrastructure? Port, rail, distribution buildings, density of population. And that's why your most valuable asset in Florida, you need to connect the dots to Central Florida, Lakeland, Winter Haven, because even you look at like a Home Depot, that their big new deal they're building in Plant City, it's connected to Port Everglades. So everything that Home Depot is going to have coming in is coming into Port Everglades and is going up there for distribution. So I would really understand that logistics infrastructure. That paper I wrote, we published it a year ago, January, February at the university with the transformer on it. I think I put it in one of the previous decks. That's still completely valid. It's all gotten accelerated. So you're the state with more ports and harbors than any other state. The fact that explain to them you're going to have air cargo, you're going to have passenger routes that still go to Europe. So entities like Southwest and Delta, I think, are going to focus, and those are very important markets to them, especially with international travel out of Miami or Orlando. So I would emphasize the logistics infrastructure. And I would give them those forward-looking metrics and some of the earnings that point to why Florida or why your market. And it could be for why North Carolina or why any other, Alabama, Tennessee, Arizona. I'll tell them the same things. You need to understand your logistics infrastructure. You need to understand, why would manufacturing coming back to the U.S., why would they pick Florida, Arizona, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia? Why there? And it's all going to be the infrastructure, rail, ports, all that connectivity. And along with that, then you have the domino effect. The office, look at the story. I think I posted it. I don't know if we shared. Carnival Cruises had a thing on the office market. It was in one of the South Florida papers. And I did not realize how much office space that Carnival Cruises took up in South Florida, and even had a new building under construction. So I hadn't even connected the dot on Carnival Cruises and the office market in South Florida from something like that. So, and I think being aware of where the reprice opportunity is going to be best, and it's going to come with adaptive reuse. So if you see a good existing building or a warehouse, it could be a really good adaptive reuse for telemedicine, for distribution, last mile, being on top of all of that. So they're going to want to understand the where and why as we put our economy back up and we bring manufacturing back. And in that logistics paper, I said the number one thing driving everything economically and economically development in the United States was logistics infrastructure. And I gave my old golden triangle, which went from Florida up to the Great Lakes and down to Texas and everything in there. 80% of all new manufacturing and all corporate relocations were within that triangle. It was about 8 states, over half our GDP. It's in that piece if I can help in any way, but where and why, if we're standing our economy up, where is it going to be best and strongest first? And where is the onshoring going to come from and base itself here in the United States? I don't think it's going to be in Illinois or New York or high density areas. I think it's going to be logistics infrastructure using more rail, more ports, and less physical handling where you got more automation. And air cargo is going to be a big piece of it, a very big piece of it. Does that help? Did I dodge it
Casey,
good
I
enough?
want to thank our sponsors. Very helpful, very helpful. I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank our participants, which numbered over 70 today. I want to thank you personally, Casey, for your excellence with these presentations. And to me, it's very helpful. I'm sure it's very helpful to everyone else. We will make the slides available and the recording available. That's a much asked question on the website. So tune in to the FLCCIM website for the slides and the recording. And the other thing that I want to mention to you, Casey, is that we still get the usual accolades and they pour in the form of emails, text, and even one on the chat about your excellence and your presentations. People look forward to it, so we look forward to May 5th.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
So May 5th and May 19th, and I'm very honored to do it and have the affiliation with the CCIM Institute. So what we'll do is we'll put some, maybe I'll get some gator shoelaces on the red shoes. Would that help you out?
It's a compromise.
It's a compromise. They can work their way out and strangle the rest of the shoe.
I'm moving in the right direction.
It's CCIM red, so it's all good.
All right, Casey.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, everybody.